Hugh, I know what it means to say that God is all-powerful. God can do anything, at least anything logically possible. What does it mean to say that God is all-free?
Well, what it means to me to say that God is free is simply to say that his action is not hemmed in or confined or constrained by any consideration whatever.
Now that definition sounds constrained to me because you didn't say that God is free to do anything.
No, I didn't. And the reason is because that suggests that prior to God taking action in one way or another, that there isn't anything to be spoken of. That is to say that there are these prior options. And I think what gets us in trouble in thinking about divine freedom is more than anything else what I call the deliberational model of creation, according to which there are these prior options that are available to God, one way or another. And then he evaluates them, selects the best one, and realizes it in existence, okay? Now, the problem is, then you have a twofold problem. One is, you have to ask, where did the prior options come from? And there are two possibilities. You could say, well, God created those too, in which case you say, well, why bother them? Why not just go ahead and create the world rather than creating the possibilities and then creating the world? Are there possible possibilities that you're selecting? You know, he's not going to create the possibilities by considering options, right? Because the possibilities are the options, right? Okay, so if he's going to do that without considering options, then why not create the world without considering options? So that's the first thing. Or you might say that God doesn't create the options. If he doesn't create the options, then it seems to me like they're constraining him because he has to depend on them being available in advance in order to be able to create.
They're there and he just picks the one that he
picks what's best. So in order to be able to create triangles, there has to be available in advance triangularity, right? The Platonic form of triangularity. If it wasn't there, he'd be stuck. No triangles. He'd have to do something else, right? Okay. So that introduces dependence in God, and so you don't want that either, okay? Well, then it doesn't really look like these advanced models or advanced possibilities for creation are going to be a very helpful thing. They're going to be more trouble than they're worth. But there's a second dimension to the problem, and that's that if they are available in advance, then we're tempted to think that God is going to be constrained to pick the best one, if there is a best one, constrained by, I guess, some prior disposition on his part to behave well, right? He can't resist. He says, got to go ahead and do it. And I don't think that's right.
Well, that's one of the ways that people say that God is not free, because God must pick the best one, or God must act morally, right, or God must do these other things, so that God has more constraint on his freedom than we have on ours.
Right, and if in fact there are no prior possibilities, then God isn't compelled to produce the best one. Even if he does have an inveterate disposition to be a nice guy, there's nothing to be a nice guy about until the world gets created, and then the problem's over with. You don't have to choose.
There is an internal coherence of what you say. It just seems like that it sounds so fantastic in the worst sense of the word, in the sense that it's hard to believe that anything like that, like this whole world could come about just like that's the only way without any possibilities. This just has to be this way.
Right.
I mean, that just attacks all credulity.
Well, sure. It may. It doesn't attack any credulity of mine. But if in fact the alternative model simply gets you into trouble, if it's more trouble than it's worth, then it's better to go with this.
Certainly, all models, when you're talking about God, and when you really dig down, all models have trouble. And so one can say maybe the whole concept of God, it doesn't make sense, or there's something that we're missing. And I want to explore, because I hope there's a God. I'm not sure. I hope there is. And I want to explore that. This conversation is extremely important, because what you're saying is, in order for God to be coherent in the sense of being free in the sense that God must be free to really be God, the greatest possible being, you're saying that there is only one way that things could happen.
No, I'm not. because that's talking about prior possibilities or prior necessities. There's not one way. There are no coulds.
Okay.
There are no coulds.
It's just reality.
It's just, yeah, there's one way that things
There's
do
one
happen.
way. There's one, okay, there's no could, but there's one way that things do happen.
Right,
It's
and
not
everybody agrees with that.
Well, everybody agrees that this is a way that things are happening. People may think there are a lot of other ways that it happened or could have happened.
Well, could have happened, yeah. A lot of people think there are other ways it could have happened. I don't know too many people who think that there are other ways that it does happen. Now, there may be.
Well, it depends on what you mean by it. I mean, if you take the total of all plurality of worlds, everything all together, if that's your it, then that's right. There's only one way.
That's my it.
Yeah, that's your okay. The biggest, you have the biggest possible it that there could be.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that sense, your it is it.
Right.
I give you that. But
at least the biggest possible non-God it.
Yeah. Okay. But then you're saying that it was impossible for there even to have been any other possibility other than the it that there is, in some hard sense.
I'm not saying that, because that is suggesting a constraint, that it had to be the way it went. It didn't have to be the way it went. It just went the way it went.
Right.
And until that happens, there are no possibilities or necessities to be disposed of.
So that's even a stronger sense. There are, let me go through this. So some people think God had all these different, infinite number of possibilities, and God deliberated in some timeless sense or whatever, and picked whatever God thought was the best one. It might have not been some absolute best, because that may be impossible, but God actualized one set of worlds. That's
say a very good world, a very good set of worlds.
Sure, and out of infinite choices that deliberated. The next step says that there are all these possibilities, and that one of them just by force becomes the case. But you're saying that all of that is wrong, because there were never any different possibilities.
Right.
That there's only one way that things happened, went.
Right. And now, once it's gone that way, now we can start talking about possibilities. We can look at the world itself, and we can say about parts of it. We can say, well, it looks to me as though there could have been, let's say, 4 volcanoes on Hawaii instead of 2 or 3 or whatever it is, right? And sure, within a limited perspective like that, one can see multiple options, right? But if you're talking about the position of God as creator, okay, prior to creation, there's no Hawaii to be talking about.
There's no anything to be talking about.
There's no anything to be talking about. There's no such thing as a volcano. There's no such kind of thing as a volcano. There's nothing. And so there's nothing to be discussed. There's no sense to the claim that it could have been different, and there's no sense to the claim that it had to be this way. The only thing that makes sense is this is the way it goes.
Yeah, and that has some internal coherence to it, but as part of the internal coherence, I would say that your God is one of the least free gods I have ever heard.
Well, we're going to wind up discussing, if you put it that way, what freedom is for God, and freedom as I see it is simply that God's action not be constrained. And it's certainly not constrained on the view that I have, because there are no prior possibilities that he's dependent upon. There are no prior necessities that he's driven to realize. There's just what he does.